Last video we established that the 7 deadly sins were not in the Bible. They were compiled by a 4th century Egyptian monk named Evagrius, revised by Pope Gregory in 590 CE, and turned into the moral grammar of Western civilization through Dante and Aquinas. One tradition, one list, 1,500 years of influence. Here is what nobody told you about that list. Every major civilization in human history, independently, without contact, sometimes thousands of years earlier, identified the same failures. Not the same words, not the same framework, not the same theological justification. The same underlying human patterns. The Hindu tradition had 6 of them, organized into a system at least as old as the oldest Christian monasticism. The Buddhist tradition had 3 root poisons that generate all the others, and those 3 map directly onto the deepest layer of the Christian list. The Islamic tradition had its own catalog of the soul's worst tendencies, grounded in Quran and Hadith, that overlaps with the Christian 7 at almost every point. The ancient Greeks had one word that captured what Gregory called the deadliest sin more precisely than Gregory did. And the Stoics, pagan philosophers writing centuries before Christianity, produced a moral psychology so close to Evagrius's desert framework that historians still debate whether Evagrius was simply a Christian repackaging of Stoic thought. What does it mean that every civilization, staring at the human condition from completely different angles, keeps finding the same things wrong? It means one of 2 things. Either these traditions are all pointing at something real about human nature that transcends any single cultural framework, or the human mind has a small number of ways it can go wrong, and every tradition that thinks carefully enough about human failure eventually finds them all. Both of those conclusions are more interesting than anything the individual traditions say on their own. Hinduism, the 6 enemies that were there first. The Hindu tradition's closest equivalent to the 7 deadly sins is called the Arishadvarga, the 6 enemies of the soul, or sometimes the Shadripu, the 6 internal adversaries. 6, not 7. But when you look at what they are, the overlap is immediate. Kama desire, particularly sexual desire, but not exclusively. The craving for sensory pleasure in any form. The Buddhist tradition uses the same word for the same concept. In the Christian list, lust. Krodha, anger, wrath. The violent reaction of the will against whatever stands between the self and what it wants. The Christian list, wrath. Lobha, greed. Covetousness. The insatiable desire for more than one has and more than one needs. The Christian list, greed. Moha, delusion. Attachment, the confusion that arises from mistaking temporary and contingent things for permanent and ultimate ones. This one is wider than anything on the Christian list. It encompasses the fundamental misidentification of what is real and what matters that the tradition considers the root of all the others. Mada, pride, arrogance, the intoxication of ego. The Sanskrit root suggests a kind of drunkenness, the self so inflated with its own importance that it loses contact with reality. The Christian list, pride. Matsarya, envy, jealousy, the pain caused by another's success. The Christian list, envy. 6 against 7. Gluttony appears not as a separate category, but subsumed within kama, the craving for sensory pleasure. And sloth, in the Christian sense, does not appear directly, though what Aquinas meant by sloth, the sadness about spiritual goods and the failure to love what deserves to be loved, appears in a different Hindu framework about the 3 gunas, the fundamental qualities of all matter. The 3 gunas. This is where Hindu moral psychology goes deeper than a simple list of bad things. The Hindu tradition holds that all matter, including the human mind and will, is composed of 3 fundamental qualities in varying proportions. Tamas, inertia, darkness, confusion, heaviness. The quality that produces dullness, confusion, attachment, and spiritual torpor. Tamasic states include depression, lethargy, self-deception, and the kind of deadness of spirit that the Christian tradition calls acedia. Rajas passion, activity, restlessness, desire, the quality that drives ambition, desire, anger, pride, and the ceaseless activity of a mind that cannot be still. Most of the sins on both the Christian and Hindu lists are rajasic. They involve a misdirected energy, a craving that cannot be satisfied. Sattva clarity, balance, purity, wisdom, the quality that, when dominant, allows the mind to perceive clearly and the will to choose rightly. The Hindu framework says, sin is not primarily about breaking rules. It is about the proportion of qualities in your mind. A mind dominated by tamas cannot think clearly enough to choose well. A mind dominated by rajas craves too intensely to rest in what is actually good. Only the sattvic mind, clear, balanced, unagitated, can consistently choose rightly. This is a more sophisticated account than a list of prohibited actions. It locates the problem not in the will alone, but in the quality of consciousness from which the will operates. And it maps almost exactly onto what Evagrius was describing when he talked about the logismoi, the thoughts that cloud the mind and distort the will before sin ever becomes an action. Different vocabulary, same observation. Buddhism, the three poisons that generate everything else. Buddhism makes a move that no other tradition quite makes. It reduces the problem to three. Three root poisons. Three fundamental distortions of mind from which every other form of human failure flows. Lobha, greed, desire, attachment, the craving that reaches toward pleasure and away from pain, that wants to possess what is pleasant and eliminate what is unpleasant. Dosa, hatred, aversion, anger, the pushing away, the violent rejection of what is painful or threatening or unwanted. Moha, delusion, ignorance, confusion, the fundamental misperception of reality, specifically, the belief in a permanent, independent self that must be protected and gratified at all costs. 3. But they generate everything else. Pride, in the Buddhist analysis, is not a separate root, it is a form of delusion. The proud person is deluded about who they are and what their qualities actually consist of. Envy is a form of desire combined with aversion, craving what someone else has while being aversive toward that person's success. Wrath is dosa at its most intense. Lust is lobha, directed at sexual pleasure. Greed is lobha, directed at material things. Sloth, in the Buddhist analysis, is a form of moha, the dullness of a mind too confused and undirected to engage with what is real. The Buddhist reduction is elegant because it identifies the mechanism rather than just cataloging the outputs. The Christian list gives you 7 descriptions of what goes wrong. The Buddhist analysis gives you 3 explanations of why it goes wrong. The wheel of life. The Buddhist Bhavachakra, the wheel of life, the visual representation of the cycle of existence, places 3 animals at its very center: a pig, a snake, and a bird. Each one biting the tail of the one ahead of it, locked in a circular pursuit. The pig, moha, delusion. The snake, dosa, hatred. The bird, lobha, desire. These 3 drive the wheel. The entire cycle of birth and death and rebirth and suffering, the entire range of human experience that Buddhism aims to address, is driven by these 3 animals in a circle at the center. The image is one of the most psychologically honest in any religious tradition. Not a devil tempting from outside, not external forces imposing their will on an innocent human being. 3 animals inside, chasing each other, driving everything. Mara and the Buddhist temptation narrative. The Buddha's night of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree included a confrontation with Mara, the Buddhist figure of evil and temptation. Mara sent 3 daughters to seduce the meditating Siddhartha. Tanya, craving, arati, aversion, restlessness, and raga, passion, desire. 3 daughters, 3 of the 5 aggregates of clinging, 3 forms of the 3 root poisons. The Buddha defeated them not by fighting, but by perceiving, by seeing through the daughters to what they actually were. The delusion could not survive accurate perception. This is the Buddhist solution to the problem of sin. Not moral heroism, not willpower, not punishment, not forgiveness. Accurate seeing. The sins, the root poisons, lose their power when perceived clearly for what they are. Whether or not you accept the Buddhist framework, this is a psychologically profound observation. Most of what drives bad behavior is invisible to the person doing it. The greedy person does not think of themselves as greedy. The proud person genuinely believes their self-assessment is accurate. The wrathful person believes their anger is justified. The poison works precisely because it distorts perception. You cannot fight your way out of a distortion. You can only see through it. Islam, the soul's enemies, in the Quran and Hadith. The Islamic tradition does not have a fixed list of 7 deadly sins equivalent to the Christian framework. But it has something more granular, a detailed account of the kabair, the major sins, and the akhlaq madhmuma, the blameworthy character traits that together cover the same moral territory. The Quran returns repeatedly to certain failures of character as the primary obstacles between the human and the divine. Not a numbered list. The Quranic approach is more narrative, more contextual, more embedded in specific situations and specific human stories. But the patterns are recognizable. Kibr, pride. The Quran's treatment of pride is among its most sustained theological themes, and it begins at the very beginning, with Iblis refusing to bow to Adam. Iblis's refusal was, at its root, an act of kibr, the conviction that his own assessment of his worth was more reliable than the divine command. I am better than him, 4 words, and the fall. The Prophet Muhammad described kibr in a hadith with extraordinary precision. Pride is rejecting the truth and looking down on people. 2 components, both required. Not merely thinking you are superior, but refusing to accept what is true because accepting it would threaten your sense of superiority. This is closer to Aquinas' account than most comparisons acknowledge. Hasad, envy. The Quran warns against hasad in the Surah Al-Falaq, from the evil of the envier when he envies. This is one of the du'as Muslims recite as protection. Islamic tradition distinguishes between hasad, the malicious envy that wishes harm on the envied, and gibta, a permissible form of wanting what another has without wishing them harm. The line between them is the attitude toward the other person's good. Hasad is specifically condemned because it implicitly questions divine wisdom. If God gave that person that blessing and you resent it, you are in effect resenting God's decision. Shahwa, appetite, and desire. The Islamic moral tradition addresses what it calls shahwa, appetite, desire, the pull of the lower self. The Nafs, ammara, the commanding self. The self that commands toward evil is the Islamic equivalent of what the Christian tradition calls concupiscence. The disordered tendency toward sin that results from being embodied creatures with appetites that can exceed their proper function. The Quran's treatment of this is not puritanical. Desires are not evil in themselves. Food is good. Sex within marriage is good. Pleasure is not forbidden. What is condemned is the shahwa that overrides reason and divine guidance appetite that becomes the governing principle rather than serving the good life. The nafs and its stages. Islamic psychology describes the human self, the nafs, as moving through stages of moral development. Al-nafs, al-ammara, the commanding self, which commands toward sin and follows appetite without restraint. Al-nafs, al-lawama, the self-reproaching self, which is aware of its failures and reproaches itself for them, not yet free from sin, but no longer comfortable with it. Al-nafs, al-mutmaina, the tranquil self, at peace with God, free from the compulsive pull of the lower desires. This is not a list of sins. It is a map of moral development, the same territory the Christian tradition covers with its account of how the logismoi are addressed and the soul purified. The tools are different. The prayer, the fasting, the pilgrimage, the remembrance of God dhikr are the Islamic mechanisms of transformation. But the problem they are addressing, the disordered self, the commanding nafs, the soul that has let appetite govern reason, is the same problem Evagrius was describing from his Egyptian desert cave. Ancient Greece, the one word that captured the root. The Greeks did not have a list of 7 sins. They were not primarily interested in cataloging moral failures the way the Christian tradition was. But they had one concept that cuts to the center of the entire discussion with a precision that the later Christian framework sometimes misses. Hubris. In modern usage, hubris means excessive pride. A person of hubris is arrogant, overconfident, heading for a fall. In its original Greek theological sense, hubris was something more specific and more disturbing. Hubris was the act of deliberately humiliating another person specifically for the pleasure of doing so. Not anger, which seeks to hurt in response to injury. Not greed, which harms others as a byproduct of acquisition. Hubris harms others for the purpose of demonstrating one's own power over them. The humiliation of the victim was the point. Every act of cruelty that is not instrumental, that is not a means to some other end, but is itself the end, is hubris in the original Greek sense. What made hubris the supreme transgression in Greek moral and legal thought was not just its cruelty. It was its implication about the perpetrator's relationship with the divine order. The gods had placed limits on human behavior. Hubris was the explicit violation of those limits, the statement, through action, that the perpetrator considered themselves above the divine order, that they could harm others without consequence, that the moral structure of the cosmos did not apply to them. This is why hubris attracted divine punishment nemesis so reliably in Greek mythology. Not because the gods were vengeful about personal affronts, because hubris was a statement about the structure of reality, and reality pushed back. When the Christian tradition locates pride at the root of all sin, the conviction that one is self-sufficient, above divine order, not subject to the same moral structure as everyone else. It is describing the same thing. The Greeks called hubris. Different cultural framework, same perception. Pleonexia. The Greeks also identified pleonexia, the desire for more than one's share, more wealth, more honor, more pleasure, more power than is properly one's portion. Aristotle considered pleonexia the root of injustice, because injustice is always someone taking more than their proper share at someone else's expense. Pleonexia maps directly onto what Gregory called the capital sins of greed and envy, and arguably pride as well, since pride is a kind of pleonexia about honor and status. The Greek tradition had the diagnosis 2 centuries before Evagrius wrote it down. Stoicism, the pagan psychology that almost became the Christian one. Of all the non-Christian traditions that map onto the 7 deadly sins, the most direct parallel, the one that raises the most interesting historical questions, is Stoicism. The Stoics, Zeno, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. Seneca developed a moral psychology in the 3 centuries before and after Christ that is so close to what Evagrius later systematized that historians genuinely debate the relationship between them. The Stoics identified 4 passions movements of the soul that, when disordered, produce all moral failure. Hedon, pleasure, specifically the false belief that external goods can produce genuine happiness, the pursuit of pleasure as a good in itself. Epithumia, desire, appetite, craving the reaching toward future goods, with the conviction that having them will produce the satisfaction that the present moment lacks. Lupe, grief, pain, distress, the soul's response to the loss of things it had invested with too much importance. Phobos fear the anticipatory suffering about future losses of things similarly overvalued. These four are not the 7 deadly sins, but the structure is identical. Disordered attachments to things that are not genuine goods, producing a life of perpetual agitation and moral failure. The Stoic solution: recognize that the only genuine good is virtue, the proper exercise of reason and will. External things, wealth, pleasure, status, health, even life itself, are adiaphora, indifferent things, neither good nor bad in themselves. Only your relationship to them can be good or bad. This is not the Christian solution. The Christian tradition does not say that wealth and pleasure are indifferent. It says they are genuine goods, capable of being used rightly or wrongly. But the Stoic diagnosis that moral failure consists in investing things with an importance they don't actually have, and that this investment produces the disordered passions that drive bad behavior, is exactly what Evagrius brought into Christian monasticism. Evagrius was educated in Athens before he went to the desert. He had read the Stoics. The logismoi, the 8 thoughts, are a Christianized version of a Stoic psychological analysis. The Desert Fathers may have been building on Stoicism as much as on Scripture. The pagan philosophers and the Christian monks were looking at the same human mind, what every tradition agrees on and the one thing they disagree about. 7 traditions, different lists, different names, different theological justifications. And underneath all of them, 3 agreements so consistent they amount to a cross-cultural statement about human nature. Agreement 1. The root problem is not action, but orientation. Every tradition on this list locates the problem upstream of the sin itself. The Buddhist root poisons generate sin. They are not themselves specific sins. The Hindu Arishadvarga are enemies of the soul, internal adversaries that distort judgment before action occurs. The Stoic passions are movements of the soul based on mistaken valuations. The sin is already in the valuation, not just in the behavior it produces. Evagrius's logismoi are thoughts, not actions. They operate at the level of attention. Every serious moral framework in human history has concluded that sin is not primarily about what you do. It is about what you love and what you fear. Fix the love, and the behavior follows. Agreement 2. Pride is the most dangerous. Not always called pride, not always listed first. But in every tradition that has thought carefully about the hierarchy of moral failures, the conclusion is the same. The sin that is most difficult to see in yourself, most resistant to correction, and most generative of every other failure is the one Gregory called superbia, the Greeks called hubris, the Islamic tradition calls kibr, and the Hindu tradition calls mada. The conviction that you are the measure of your own worth, that your assessment of yourself is more reliable than any external standard, that you are exempt from the moral structure that applies to everyone else. Every tradition arrives here, because every tradition that observes the human mind carefully eventually notices that the people who cannot be corrected, the people for whom every challenge becomes a threat, every criticism becomes an attack, every reminder of limitation becomes an insult, are the people most likely to commit every other failure without noticing they have done so. Pride does not just cause sin directly, it prevents the recognition of sin that would allow correction. It is the most dangerous not because of what it does, but because of what it prevents. Agreement 3. The solution is not willpower. Every tradition on this list explicitly rejects the idea that moral failure can be addressed primarily through willpower, through trying harder, gritting your teeth, forcing the behavior even when the desire runs the other way. Buddhism. Willpower is not the solution, because willpower operates in the same mind that is already distorted by the root poisons. You cannot think your way out of a confusion that is corrupting your thinking. Hinduism. You cannot suppress rajas through more rajas. The restless, craving mind cannot will its way to stillness. Stoicism. The passions arise from mistaken judgments about value. You cannot override the passion directly. You must correct the judgment that produces it. Christianity. You cannot love rightly by forcing yourself to love rightly. The disordered loves need to be reordered, which requires the kind of transformation that the tradition calls grace, and that the practice of prayer and asceticism and community is meant to facilitate. Different mechanisms proposed. Same diagnosis. The problem is in the will's orientation, and the will cannot reorient itself through sheer force of will. The one real disagreement. Does the human being need help from outside? Here the traditions genuinely part ways. Buddhism and Stoicism hold that the human being contains everything needed for its own moral correction. The path to freedom from the root poisons runs through the mind's own capacity for clear perception. No external grace required. No divine intervention. The resources are within you, they simply need to be accessed and developed. Christianity and Islam hold that the human being is not self-sufficient in this regard. The disordered will cannot reorder itself. The confused mind cannot see clearly from within its own confusion. What is needed is something from outside grace, divine assistance, revelation that the human being cannot generate from its own resources. This disagreement has profound consequences for how each tradition structures the moral life. If the resources are within you, practice, attention, and wisdom are the tools. If you need help from outside, prayer, revelation, relationship with the divine, and the community that mediates those things become essential. Both positions are serious. Both have been held by extraordinarily thoughtful people. And the evidence of daily life, the persistent failure of people who try very hard to be better and keep failing, can be read as supporting either one. The Egyptian monk sat in his desert cave and catalogued 8 thoughts. The Indian philosopher walked the banks of the Ganges and found 6 enemies. The Buddhist meditator sat under a tree and watched 3 poisons generate everything else. The Stoic philosopher wrote letters from exile and identified 4 disordered passions. The Greek tragedian staged Oedipus and Agamemnon and named what destroyed them both with one word. None of them were talking to each other. All of them were looking at the same thing. Because the thing they were looking at was not a cultural artifact. It was not a theological category invented to serve an institutional interest. It was a human mind doing what human minds do when left to their own devices. Reaching for things it doesn't need. Defending its own importance past the point of accuracy. Letting one craving grow so large it crowds out everything else. Feeling the pain of others' success as if it were its own loss. Going through the motions of meaningful activity while losing the conviction that the motions mean anything. Every tradition that has paid careful enough attention to the human mind has found these things there, because they were there to be found. The question none of these traditions fully answered, the one that remains genuinely open, is why. Why does a mind that is capable of extraordinary love and creativity and wisdom so reliably tend toward these specific failures? The Christian tradition says, something went wrong at the root. A primordial misdirection that has propagated through every generation since. The Buddhist tradition says, the mind is confused about its own nature, and from that confusion, everything else follows. The Hindu tradition says, the 3 gunas are in the wrong proportion, and the correction is a lifelong practice. The Stoic tradition says, you were never taught to value the right things, and the correction is clear thinking. Different answers, every one of them pointing at the same unsettling truth. The human being, left entirely to itself, tends to fail in predictable ways, and every civilization that has ever existed has known this, and every one of them has spent enormous energy trying to do something about it.